The diner was small and quiet, sitting at the corner of a busy street. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and warm food filled the air. Red booths lined the walls, and soft music played from an old speaker near the counter. It was early afternoon and only a few people were inside. A man named Daniel sat alone at a booth near the window. He was in his late 40s, tall, with calm eyes and a tired face. His hair was short, and his posture was straight, the kind that came from years of discipline. Daniel wore simple clothes. A clean jacket, plain jeans, worn boots. He had ordered coffee and a small meal. Nothing fancy. On the table in front of him were a folded napkin, a cup of coffee, and a small brown wallet placed neatly beside his plate. Daniel sat quietly, looking out the window. He did not rush. He did not speak loudly. He simply waited. The waitress passed by and gave him a polite smile. Daniel nodded back. A few minutes later, the bell above the diner door rang. 2 police officers walked in. They were loud. Their boots hit the floor hard as they entered. One of them laughed while talking, and the other scanned the room slowly. The sound of their voices made the diner feel smaller. People looked up briefly, then looked away. The officers ordered coffee at the counter. While waiting, one of them noticed Daniel sitting alone. He stared for a moment longer than needed. Then he nudged the other officer and nodded toward Daniel. They walked over to his booth. Daniel noticed them approach. He stayed calm and looked up slowly. "Can we help you?" one officer asked, his voice sharp. Daniel shook his head.
"No, sir.
"I am just having lunch." The officer looked at Daniel's clothes, then at the table. "You been here long?" he asked. "Not long," Daniel replied quietly. The other officer crossed his arms. "People around here get nervous when strangers sit alone," he said. Daniel frowned slightly. "I am not bothering anyone." The officers exchanged a look. One of them leaned closer. "You got ID?" he asked. Daniel paused, then nodded. "Yes." He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, placing it on the table. He did not open it yet. The officer smirked. "Why so careful?" Daniel looked him in the eye. "I respect the uniform," he said. "I also respect myself." That answer did not sit well with them. The first officer laughed loudly. "Hear that," he said to the diner. "Respect." Some customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The officer tapped the table with his finger. "Open the wallet." Daniel calmly opened it. Inside were cards placed neatly, along with a folded piece of paper and a metal badge attached to a small chain. The officer barely looked at it. Instead, he pushed the wallet slightly with his finger. "Stand up," he said. Daniel stayed seated. "Why?" "So, we can be sure you are not hiding anything." The tone was sharp now. The waitress froze behind the counter, watching. Daniel slowly stood up. The officers searched him quickly and roughly right there in the diner. One officer made jokes, while the other checked his pockets. "Nothing here," one said, sounding disappointed. People were watching now. Daniel remained silent. His face showed control, but his eyes carried weight. Years of experience taught him when to speak and when to stay quiet. One officer leaned close and spoke low. "You should pick better places to eat," he said. Daniel said nothing. They stepped back and laughed. "Sit down," one of them said. "You can go back to your lunch." Daniel sat slowly. His hands rested on the table. The diner felt tense. The officers turned away, clearly satisfied. But as they took their first steps back toward the counter, something caught the attention of the younger officer. He glanced back at Daniel's table.
His eyes stopped. His face changed.
"Wait," he said quietly. He walked back and looked closer. On Daniel's table, next to the wallet, was something the officers had completely missed. Something that made the room fall silent. The diner grew very quiet. The younger officer stood still, staring at the table. His eyes were fixed on the small metal badge lying beside Daniel's wallet.
It was not shiny.
It was not large, but it carried weight. The officer reached out slowly and picked it up. His hands paused. He turned the badge over and read the words engraved on it. His face changed again, this time more clearly. The smile was gone. The confidence in his posture faded. He looked at Daniel, then at the badge, then back at Daniel. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice lower now. Daniel looked at the badge calmly. "It belongs to me," he said. The older officer noticed the shift and walked back over. "What is it?" he asked, sounding annoyed. The younger officer handed him the badge, without speaking. The older officer read it.
His eyes widened slightly.
The badge was from the military. It was old, worn, and clearly real. Attached to it was a folded paper card. The officer opened it and read quietly. The words told a story that did not match the scene they had created in their minds. Daniel was a veteran. He had served for many years. His name, rank, and service record were written clearly. There was also a small photo of him in uniform, standing straight, eyes focused, much younger but unmistakably the same man. The older officer cleared his throat. "You did not mention this," he said. Daniel looked up at him. "You did not ask," he replied calmly. The officer shifted his weight. The confidence he had earlier was gone. He glanced around the diner. People were watching closely now. The younger officer placed the badge back on the table carefully, as if it were fragile. "I did not realize," he said. Daniel folded his hands. "That happens often," he said quietly. The older officer tried to regain control of the moment. "You understand we have to be careful," he said. "We're just doing our job." Daniel looked at him steadily.
"So was I," he said.
The words landed heavy. A man at the counter nodded slightly. A woman in a nearby booth looked down at her coffee, clearly uncomfortable. The waitress took a slow step forward. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The older officer forced a smile. "Yes," he said quickly. "Everything is fine." But the room knew better. Daniel sat calmly, but his presence felt stronger now. Not louder, just stronger. The younger officer spoke again. "You served," he said, more like a statement than a question. "Yes," Daniel replied. "I did." "How long?" "Long enough." There was silence again. The older officer looked at Daniel's plate, untouched now. "We did not mean to disturb your meal," he said. Daniel nodded once. "Yet you did." The officer swallowed. People around them were no longer pretending not to watch. The energy in the diner had shifted. What started as control had turned into discomfort. The younger officer leaned slightly toward his partner. "We should go," he whispered. The older officer hesitated. Before he could respond, something else on the table caught his eye. Next to the badge was the folded paper Daniel had kept inside his wallet. The officer had seen it earlier but ignored it. Now he looked closer. "What is that?" he asked. Daniel reached for the paper and unfolded it slowly. It was a photograph. The photo showed a group of soldiers standing together. They were dirty, tired, but smiling. In the center stood Daniel, younger, wearing full uniform. Behind them was a damaged building. In front of them stood a flag. Daniel held the photo for a moment, then placed it back on the table. "That was taken after we brought our people home," he said. The older officer stared at the photo. The younger officer stepped back slightly. No one spoke. The diner felt smaller again, but in a different way. The noise of the street outside faded. Even the music from the old speaker seemed quieter. The older officer straightened his jacket. "Sir," he said, choosing his words carefully now. "We did not mean any disrespect." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "I did not ask for special treatment," Daniel said. "I only asked to be left alone." The officer nodded. "Understood." He glanced at his partner, then back at Daniel. "We will be leaving now," he said. The officers turned and walked toward the door. This time, their steps were quieter. Just before reaching the door, the younger officer stopped and turned around. "Thank you for your service," he said. Daniel nodded once. "Take care," he replied. The door closed behind them. The diner let out a breath it did not know it was holding. The waitress walked over slowly. "I am sorry about that," she said softly. Daniel gave a small smile. "It is all right." She placed a hand on the table. "Your meal is on the house today." Daniel shook his head gently. "Thank you, but I will pay." She hesitated, then nodded. As she walked away, a man from another booth stood up. "Sir," he said to Daniel, "I just want to say I saw what happened. You handled it with dignity." Daniel looked at him.
Thank you, he said.
Another customer nodded. Then another. Daniel finished his coffee slowly. When he stood up to leave, the badge and photo were still on the table. He picked them up carefully and placed them back in his wallet. As he walked toward the door, his shoulders straight, the room felt different. The humiliation was gone. What remained was respect. And outside, as Daniel stepped into the daylight, the world felt a little quieter, a little clearer, and far from finished. Daniel stepped out of the diner and walked down the street slowly. The afternoon sun was warm on his face. Cars passed by, and people moved around him, each busy with their own lives. He took a deep breath. Inside the diner, the moment had ended. But for Daniel, moments like that never fully disappeared. They stayed quietly in the mind, joining many others from years before. Daniel walked to a small park a few blocks away and sat on a bench under a tree. He placed his hands on his knees and looked straight ahead. He did not feel angry. He felt tired. Tired of being questioned. Tired of being judged before being known. Tired of needing proof just to exist in peace. His thoughts drifted back many years. Daniel remembered the day he joined the military. He had been young, full of purpose, and ready to serve. He believed in duty, discipline, and respect. He believed that if he gave his best, it would matter. The years that followed were not easy. He trained hard. He followed orders. He protected the people beside him, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. In uniform, they were all the same. When his service ended, Daniel returned home quietly. There were no parades, no loud celebrations, just a plane ride back and a promise to start over. Life after service was different. He worked simple jobs. He kept to himself. He carried his memories quietly. The badge and photo stayed in his wallet, not to show off, but to remember who he was and what he had done. At the park, Daniel sat for a long time. Across the street, a police car slowed near a stop sign. Daniel noticed it, but did not react. The car stopped. The same two officers from the diner stepped out. Daniel stayed seated. The officers approached slowly, their posture different now. There was no laughter. No sharp tone. The older officer spoke first.
Sir, he said.
May we talk for a moment? Daniel looked at him calmly. You may. They stood in front of him, unsure of where to place their hands. We have been thinking about what happened earlier, the younger officer said. We realized we handled it wrong. Daniel listened. The older officer nodded. We made assumptions. That was not right. Daniel studied their faces. He could see discomfort. He could also see honesty. I did not come to your diner to teach a lesson, Daniel said. I came to eat. Yes, sir, the officer replied. And we took that from you. Daniel stood up slowly. Respect is not about badges, he said. It is about how you treat people when no one is watching. The words stayed in the air. The younger officer swallowed. We understand, he said. Daniel nodded once. The officers stepped back. We will do better, the older officer said. Daniel looked at them for a moment longer, then spoke. I hope you do. They walked away, without another word. Daniel watched them leave, then turned back toward the street. He felt no victory. No satisfaction. Only relief. Later that evening, Daniel visited a small community center nearby. He had been invited there weeks earlier to speak with young people about life, discipline, and choices. He almost canceled, but now he decided to go. Inside the center, a group of teenagers sat in a circle. Some looked curious. Others looked unsure. Daniel stood at the front. He did not talk about the diner. He did not talk about the officers. He talked about responsibility. He talked about patience. He talked about knowing your worth even when others do not see it. One young man raised his hand. How do you stay calm when people treat you unfairly? He asked. Daniel thought for a moment. Because anger gives away your power, he said. Calm keeps it. The room grew quiet. When Daniel finished speaking, several people thanked him. One boy shook his hand and said, I want to be like you. Daniel smiled gently. Be better, he said. That night, Daniel returned home. He placed his wallet on the table and removed the badge and photo. He looked at them for a moment, then placed them back inside. They were not tools to prove his value. His value was already known. The next morning, Daniel returned to the diner.
He sat at the same booth.
The waitress smiled warmly.
"Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Daniel replied.
This time, no one questioned him. He drank his coffee in peace. Outside, the world moved on. Some things changed slowly. Some did not change at all. But Daniel knew one thing. Dignity did not come from recognition. It came from knowing who you are and standing in that truth. And he carried that truth with him wherever he went.